Hello, everybody. Greetings and welcome here to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So I want to welcome you here to the channel. Please don't forget to hit the notification bell and subscribe. That's much appreciated. And if you like the content on the show, then hit the like button. So we're here tonight to do an episode of Into the Progverse, in which I'm going to pick my 10 favorite progressive rock bass players. Well, I'm not going to pick them. I already picked them. I'm going to give them to you. I kind of put them in some kind of a semblance of an order, and I'll kind of give them to you from the bottom up as I normally do. But we're just going to have a discussion about them throughout this episode. You have to forgive me. As always, when I eat, everything tries to come back. At some point, I'm going to get smarter and realize that you shouldn't eat just before you go onto a video, because that kind of stuff's going to happen. But I have to say, I don't always learn my lesson too well. So just going to up this a little bit. Maybe we might have to increase the light here. I don't know why it doesn't give it to me for the live version. You think things would be simple, eh? Like have things the same way on everything, but not always the case. Anyways, we're here to do the episode of Into the Progverse, in which I'm going to talk about my 10 favorite bass players. So we might as well get started. So I decided on this because last week I did the 10 favorite guitar players, and I thought, you know what? I'll just do an episode for each of the musicians in most of the band. So we'll do a bass player. Next week, I'll probably do the drummers, and at some point, we'll do the keyboardist and the vocalist too. I may do a special episode for those guys who don't necessarily have any of those going on, but may have some other things that add to it. Gentle Giant would fit into that because nobody has more people doing more things than they do. Well, actually, less people doing more things than they do. That's normally the way it is with these guys. So what I'll do is I'll start out, we'll talk. I'm just going to talk about each of these 10 bass players I've picked and why I picked them. I don't necessarily think that these guys are the best bass players for progressive rock, nor the best bass players of all time. In some cases, that might be true, but because we're only doing prog, that's going to eliminate people like John Entwistle and John Paul Jones, who are bass players that I like quite a bit, but I don't really consider The Who or Led Zeppelin really a progressive rock band. Yeah, they both have some progressive elements, but generally speaking, I think of Led Zeppelin as more of a blues, hard rock, heavy metal band. And with The Who, I tend to think of them as more of a kind of a pop, hard rock band at times. So, but neither one of them do I really think of as a progressive rock band. I guess that kind of falls for bands like Styx, who have a lot more progressive elements to their music, but I don't necessarily think of them as a progressive rock band too. To me, they're a art rock band, a hard rock band, maybe even having some progressive elements to their music, but lots of pop elements to their music as well. And even a kind of a harmony element to their music. And then there's some other bands that may fall loosely into the lot of different categories, but I only tried to include the bands that I actually think of. When I think of them, I think of progressive rock. Now, they may have other elements in their music, and most progressive rock bands do. But for the most part, I think of them as progressive rock bands. So the first one up, or the first bass player we're going to talk about, comes from this band, Jethro Tull, and actually appears on this particular album as Jeffrey Hammond. Now, I don't think of Jeffrey. Sorry, maybe a little bit better. Maybe I can get up close so you can see the album. This is, of course, their magnus opus. For many people, their magnus opus, Aqualung, maybe Thick as a Brick might be in that same category. But I don't think of Jeffrey Hammond necessarily as a great bass player. But I do like, for a guy who only played bass for 4 or 5 years, I think he did a damn good job and was on some very good albums, including this one, of course. Um, yeah, so he was kind of coerced into joining the band uh, by Ian Anderson, who kind of showed him how the bass was played. And after playing it for a bit of time, he became the bass player for the band. And I don't think he really ever wanted to be the bass player for the band, but eventually he got out of it and just never played again. The thing I liked most about Jeffrey Hammond is his outfit. I loved it. It was fantastic, very outstanding. Um, Typical prog band, like almost art rock type thing going on there. But I think he's a good bass player, but not necessarily a great bass player. Um, I guess he fit the style of the music for Jethro Tull at that particular time. And then once that time was up, he was done, and they moved on and became a much different band after that. Um, yeah. So Jeffrey Hammond, he's going to be in my 10th spot today. So next up, we'll go to another maybe a little bit obscure kind of bass player. I mean, obscure for the average person, maybe not. So I'm just going to pull this up a little bit so I can put my cup over there. Maybe not so obscure for people who watch prog music and like these types of channels and are into the progressive rock universe as a whole on YouTube. And that's Doug Ferguson from Camel. Now, I do like this particular album a lot. It could be my favorite Camel album. I don't want to give it away just yet. Maybe I will do a ranking of them at some point. So I'm going to bring up my glasses over here so I can actually see what I'm talking about. So, you've got some good stuff on here. I think he's a good bass player. Again, kind of in the same light as Jeffrey Hammond, not known as much, but I think, in generally speaking, I think he's probably a better bass player than Jeffrey. And playing with these guys who are generally more of an instrumental band with some vocals. They do vocals on their music, but they do have quite a bit of instrumental. So maybe it stands out a bit more because of that, as opposed to Jethro Tull, where vocals are a prominent part of their music. So maybe this is a little bit stronger in the bass part, mostly because of the kind of instrumental nature of their music. But this is a really good album. And it's not necessarily that this is the album where that is a strong part. It's just their early music, which Doug was on, and just really, I think, was strong bass player, but not necessarily a dominating bass player. But I do like his stuff, so I wanted to give him a mention. So that's Doug Ferguson of Camel. Next up, this guy, I could have talked about the band that I love that he's in, but I decided to pick this particular one, Drifting Sun. So we're talking about John Jowett, or Jowett, if you prefer. There's a picture of him here. I'm just looking for it. Here it is. That's him there, right where my finger is. Good, solid bass player. I like the stuff that he does with IQ, which is one of my favorite bands now, or becoming one of my favorite bands. But for some reason, I really like this album cover, and I like his bass playing on this album quite a bit. I think this is the reason I bought this album, was because he was on it, and I've grown to like his stuff quite a bit. There's a lot of good musicians on this particular album, and of course, he's one of them. So John, of course, known for his stuff with IQ. I think he does stuff with other bands too. I'm not as familiar with those people. I welcome Wade Wade, welcome to the show. Glad to have you aboard. So we're just talking about progressive rock bass players. So I've done the first two and just talking about the third one now, John Jowett, who is playing with Drifting Sun, which is my most recent album with him on it. But he also plays with IQ as well. I do like his stuff quite a bit. So now we're going to move up into more familiar territory with bass players that most people who like progressive rock will know that's what they are. So the first one, or in this case, I guess this would be number 7 from Genesis, of course, Mike Rutherford. I don't think of Mike Rutherford as being particularly a dominant bass player. And to his credit, I think he's much better than people like to give him credit for. But, he's going up against some superior musicians on this album with Steve Hackett and Phil Collins and even Tony Banks. I always thought of Mike as being somewhat the weakest link of the instrumentalists on these albums. But far from being weak, he's not weak. He's just, maybe he's in a class that's a little bit tougher than most bass players have to face. So, and this album is quite good. I think his bass playing on this is pretty good. I like his bass playing on just about everything they do. Some albums a little bit more. I was going to use Nursery Crime because that's the album that, for me, he stands out the best. But I can't find it, so we went with this one, which I also like quite a bit. So this is Selling England by the Pound. Get up close here so you can see it. It's kind of a quirky album cover too. A little bit different than some of the other stuff before it and more different than the stuff that comes after. But yeah, Mike Rutherford. Also, of course, he eventually took over playing guitar. I think he's a little bit weak in that area, but he's a strong bass player. Traditional bass player playing for rhythm primarily. Him and Phil Collins very dominant in the rhythm section on almost all these early Genesis albums. And then, of course, he gets a little bit more notoriety as they go along, picking up the guitar to replace Steve Hackett. And of course, on his own albums, he does have the one album, Acting Very Strange, where he actually does some vocals. I think his vocals are okay. I really was surprised at how good they were for somebody who just generally I don't think of as a singer, but I thought I would have preferred him to stay as the vocalist on his other stuff, but he just didn't do that. So that's Mike Rutherford. So the next one up, I thought there'll be some people who know this guy, some won't know him. So we've got Derek Moore here. Yeah, really strong. Take this out. So this is kind of their normal looking artwork from these guys. It's kind of bizarre, eh? You gotta like them though. So Derek Moore, bass player. I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's the only surviving member now. Well, at least from this album. The 3 other guys on this album are gone. But he's a solid bass player, and I actually like him quite a bit on this album. I like him even more on Tab in the Ocean, but I've been using that one a little bit too much as a prop, so I thought I would give another album another chance here. On that album, because it's a much heavier album than this one. This one's a little bit more toned down, almost a little bit more poppy in some ways. But that album, Tab in the Ocean, which is quite a bit heavier than a lot of their stuff. He's pretty heavy on that album. I like him a lot. I don't think he's a fantastic bass player, but for this band, I really like him, and I've noticed his stuff quite a bit when I'm listening to him. Maybe a little bit more than Mike Rutherford, but still a solid bass player. Derek Moore. And he's also pretty good on their opening debut album, Journey to the Center of the Eye, which I also like quite a bit. It's another kind of a little bit on the heavier side than some of their other stuff as well. So that's my next bass player. So what's that now? Is that number 6? That's number 6. So the top 5, I've probably been like these guys for quite a bit now, especially the next guy. But the next guy I like more for his vocals than I actually do for his bass playing. But and I like his bass playing more with King Crimson than I do with Emerson, Lake and Palmer, mostly because I don't follow Emerson, Lake and Palmer much, a little bit. I'm hoping one day I'm going to get the urge to follow them completely and really go in depth on it and see if I can really get myself to like it. I don't mind some of the stuff. I don't mind this song Tarkus. That's probably the reason I chose this album as a display. Get a good shot of that. That's a solid album cover. I mean, yeah, Greg is probably overshadowed by Palmer and Emerson on this album, but not vocally. Vocally, he's very strong. To me, his great talent is his vocals. His bass ability is good to very good, and he does play guitar as well. His guitar ability is a nice little bits of change on the album where you don't get that so much with Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Oh, I didn't know this was in here. Okay, that can come out of there. Anyways, yeah, so a nice picture of this album. I like this stuff on the album. The artwork on this album is good. Maybe that's the reason why I do go to this album quite a bit when I'm talking about this band. Yeah, so yeah, Greg doing vocals, bass, electric, and acoustic guitars on this. But I mean, this album is pretty much overshadowed by Keith Emerson. So that's my fifth guy, Greg Lake of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, also of King Crimson. I actually prefer him more in King Crimson, but I'm sure I'm probably on the minority in that department. So the next four guys. So now we're jumping up quite a bit. Those first six that I've said, 5 through 10, you could have really kind of arranged them in pretty much any order, and you wouldn't be far off. These next four are definitely in the top 4. So the first one on this is Ray Shulman here with Gentle Giant. I chose this album because just the same as on here, which is a track that really, when I saw him play it live, I thought to myself, wow, this guy is much better than I had anticipated him being. He's just so good. And not just with that, he plays violin too. He plays a lot of different stuff, as does every member of the band, pretty much plays just about everything. There isn't very many instruments these guys don't do. But I think Ray really stands out as a fantastic bass player. Very forward, very rhythmic, but also very classical in his style as well. A guy that I'd always kind of, and I know some other people have said this too, I kind of always wished Gentle Giant would just do one more tour. But now I don't know if I really care much because Ray's gone, and you basically have Derek, Carrie, Gary, and John. Maybe you could talk Phil to coming back, but I think Phil is about 10 years older than Derek, so he's going to be in his 80s by now. Yeah, it's too bad, but I think this album in particular is very dominated by his bass playing, just fantastic. Happy holiday to you too, Grandizer, and welcome to the show. I'm glad to have you aboard. We're just talking about my 10 favorite bass players right now in the prog world, as you have already seen. There are quite a bit of fantastic bass players. Most of them, though, even though I'm a prog giant, there's still quite a few of my bass players are not what I would call progressive rock bass players, but this guy definitely falls into that. So we're up to number 4 now, in case anybody's not, if anybody's keeping track. I chose this album because I think his bass playing is outstanding on this, but he's good on those first 4 albums, are really solid as well, as he is in just about everything they do. But for some reason, just the same, I think it just stands out a little bit, that song in my head. And whenever I think of him, I think of that particular track. So that's Gentle Giant, Ray Shulman. Rest in peace, Ray. Next up, we've got, so these next three guys, easily 1, 2, and 3. This guy's solidly in third spot, and he's grown on me with this particular album, has made me like him even more. We're talking about John Glasscock of Jethro Tull. This is my second Jethro Tull guy. I do like them quite a bit. This guy is so good, very underrated bass player, strong, very forward, very dominating, powerful bass player, just absolutely killer. And playing with Barry Barlow on here too, really that is like a knockout rhythm section if ever there was one. Yeah, if I started playing a signature beat by my 10 favorite bass players, we could be here all night, me trying to get that. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. But if you ever get a chance, if you haven't really followed John Glasscock, this album, Songs from the Wood, there's a couple of other ones that he was on. He's so strong. I never realized how good he was until you really sit down and listen to the album solidly. Just such a fantastic bass player. Another guy that I have to say, rest in peace. I could do that with just about half of these guys, which is unfortunate. But yeah, just really solid. Can't say enough good stuff about him. And left way too early. Like, I think he was in his early 20s when he died. Just such a shame. You wonder what his talent would be like now and how much more he would be appreciated now. As it is, he's my number 3. So the next two guys, easily number 2 and number 1. Maybe they could flip on any given day. At one time, I would have picked one over the other, but now it's definitely the other way around. You can't say enough about these guys, the tone, and the fact that they were both influenced by John Entwistle doesn't really surprise me all that much. So the first one we're going to go to is the number 2 guy, of course, Chris Squire. I chose this album because I think his bass tone on this is fantastic. Like, I don't know that there's anything better than this as far as his bass tone. Heart of the Sunrise, absolutely killer. I mean, you could go to just about any of their early stuff, Relayer, even their second album, Time and a Word, really, really killer bass tone on that even. And of course, Close to the Edge and all of the stuff that he was early on. I think I really noticed his abilities when I got to Drama, which was the first one. The first thing I noticed right away on that album was, this was before I knew anything about the band. It was my first venture into Yes. And the first thing I noticed right off the bat is I thought to myself, this bass player is phenomenal. And he's so forward and such a rhythmic type of guy with just some heavy bass tones. I don't know that anybody, and he was the first kind of guy that I noticed sometimes would play with a pick. I never seen a bass player play with a pick. I know a lot of bass players think that that's just wrong, but I don't know how you can say anything wrong about the way this guy plays bass. He's absolutely one of the most dominating bass players, even in a band like this, where you've got Rick Wakeman on keyboards and Steve Howe on guitars and Bill Bruford on drums. These are 3 top-notch musicians, and he doesn't take a backseat to any of them. I wished he was still alive. It's just, again, another bass player, right, that's gone, right? It's too bad. He's a fantastic bass player. Can't say enough about him. I remember watching an interview with him. It was the Hendrix interview where he was talking about meeting Jimi Hendrix and just his low-key attitude and kind of funny attitude about it. He was just, to me, a regular guy. who just happened to be a fantastic bass player. Even some of the stuff that he did and his solo stuff is really good too. Although I think he, for some reason, is best when he's with Yes. Even on some of those kind of poppy albums, he was very dominating even on them. And I often wonder what the album Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe would have sounded like, even though Tony Levin was on that and is a good bass player. I really think that that I wonder what it would have sounded like if Chris had played on that. It would have been fantastic for sure, I'm sure. Not that I could have mentioned even Tony Levin on this, but I decided for whatever reason, I chose not to put him in here tonight because I've done stuff with him, talked about him recently, so I thought I would give him a rest. And anyways, he could easily make this list, but I just think that Chris Squire in a class by himself, no doubt about it. And I think many people feel he may be the best bass player in rock history, definitely in the prog rock history for sure. So, of course, we're going to get to number one. Yeah, it's kind of depressing. I didn't realize so many of them passed away, but greatness, sometimes that's the way it goes, right? The next guy, of course, number one, is not going to come as a surprise to anybody. It's going to be Geddy Lee. I chose this album because this is the album that I think most people credit as being Rush's best album. It's not in my top 5, and I know that's hard to believe, but it isn't. It may be possible. I think in all likelihood, it's like that because it had way too much airplay, just burned me right out. But there's some fantastic bass on this, as there is on Hemispheres, Farewell to Kings, even going back to Caress of Steel or Fly By Night are both great albums. Geddy Lee has an aggressive attitude towards the bass that's, I think, unequaled by any bass player. And he doesn't even need a pick. But when he's doing his lead parts, which Rush is one of the few bands that has lead parts for a bass player as dominant as him, I just think he's a standout. He's my favorite for a lot of reasons, not just for his bass playing or his keyboard playing or even his vocals. I think he's a consummate leader type, but also a team player, if you want to call him that. He's also Canadian, and that gets a lot of points for me. So I would say Geddy Lee would be my first, and I don't think that's ever going to change. As much as I like Squire and some of these other guys, I just think this guy just being in my favorite band doesn't hurt either, So I'm picking Geddy Lee as my number one, and he is still alive, which is good. So I'll give you them back in the order that I chose them, and they're not in any necessarily. And we'll talk about maybe some other bass players that are prog bass players that I didn't mention tonight that I could have mentioned tonight. So Geddy Lee from Rush, Chris Squire of Yes fame, Jethro Tull's John Glasscock, Ray Shulman, youngest brother of the Shulman brothers from A Gentle Giant, Greg Lake of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and also of King Crimson, at least the first couple of albums anyways. Nectar, Derek Moore. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's the only original one still alive, at least from that time period. Mike Rutherford of Genesis, Mike and the Mechanics, maybe his own solo stuff. Drifting Sun, John Jowett, also from IQ as well. I think he's with a couple of other bands that maybe I'm just not as familiar with. Camel, Doug Ferguson from Camel, of course. And last but not least, from Jethro Tull, Jeffrey Hammond. Yeah, that's Ian Anderson phrase. Always got to add some quirky thing onto it, right? So other bass players that I didn't mention, obviously, I already said the one guy, Tony Levin, fantastic bass player, having played with Peter Gabriel, which is where I know him best from. But he's also played with, I think he's played with, has he played with King Crimson? Yeah, I think he's played with them. I don't know if he's played with them on their albums or just live. I'm not sure. I'm sure somebody will be able to tell me. Yeah, just the guy's done like so many different venues. He's a very active, very proactive. He was in, if you want to see, I did a video on him for my Nomads series that we did. I think that was a before the one we're doing now, Nomads, in which we picked people who've been on lots of stuff. And I think he'd been on more than just about anybody. So Tony Levin, of course, you got to mention him. What other prog guys should we mention that I didn't mention tonight? Geez, I'm drawing a bit of a blank here. There's some guys that I don't know by name that the music I do like by them as well. Of course, Lemmy played with Hawkwind, and the Eloy bass player. Actually, the Eloy bass player has really come on for me, and I probably could have put him in here too, but I couldn't remember his name, and I didn't want to go look for it. So, and I got a pain in my chest tonight, so I'm just kind of trying to take it easy here. But yeah, so there's just a lot of good bass players, but I mean, some of the best bass players don't play progressive rock, and we know who they all are: the Jack Bruces of the world, the John Entwistles of the world. John Paul Jones is another one. Then you've got, of course, Chuck Panozzo of Styx. Some people would actually label Styx as a bit of a progressive band, but I don't think that is their main focus. I think their main focus, at least early on, was maybe it was prog early on, and then it kind of drifted into this kind of hard rock scene as well. And then they became more of a poppy band too. So, but you definitely could mention a guy like John Panozzo in there. It wouldn't be out of place as well. So many good bass players that I can't even think of their names. Is there anybody out there that somebody wants to mention that maybe will trigger a memory for me? If you want to, so Grant Azur's asking me to recommend an album that I've been listening to. So I could pick the one album that I think stands out for me right now. Well, there's actually a couple of them, but I'll pull them both here. Just looking for it. Yeah, this one and the other one, which is sitting right here beside me. I'm going to do a video on it tomorrow. This one here, and to be honest with you, you could go to any album by this band. Sorry, it's upside down. Wobbler, great album. If you like that early kind of Yes sound with the instrumental sound that goes with it, this is a great band to listen to because they are very pre-75 kind of prog rock. So much so the vocalist has a very John Anderson-like sound. I wouldn't say he sounds like John Anderson, but he's definitely in the same vocal range, has that same kind of sound to it. The bass player on here is really good as well. Keyboard is probably the dominant guy on here, but definitely you'll hear a lot of that kind of yesy feel to this music. Wobbler is the band. Another band, of course, some of the same people on the Wobbler album, the vocalists for sure, are also on this, The Chronicles of Father Robin. Both the two albums I have, Book 1 and Book 3, are absolutely superb. Again, the same kind of thing going on here as is on Wobbler, where it's that pre-1975 kind of prog rock sound. Keyboards are fantastic. The vocalists are great. And the other instrumentals are very similar in style to that period of time. other bands that fit into that. Caravan, really good stuff on that as well. I didn't think so initially, but with most prog music, for me at least, it takes me a little bit of time to kind of warm up to them. Not some bands right away. And I know some people are going to say, well, you didn't mention Roger Waters. Okay, so Roger Waters is a decent bass player. In fact, some people would say he's a very good bass player. For Pink Floyd, he's a fantastic bass player. But I just can't warm up to Roger Waters. I think it's his entire attitude that kind of bothers me about him. And so I'm actually kind of glad when he split from Floyd. I did like the Floyd that came out after that. I know that a lot of people say, yeah, it's not the same as The Wall and stuff. And in some ways that's good, because I really like the sound of David Gilmour's voice. I do like his guitar playing. I like that sound that they created on the two main albums that came out, Division Bell and I'm drawing a blank, even though I was listening to it last night. Momentary Lapse of Reason, that's it. I do like those albums quite a bit, and I don't miss Roger Waters. I never followed his solo stuff. I give him kudos for being a good bass player, but he's not somebody I would listen to too much. So who else can we mention that I haven't mentioned? Of course, there's some other guys that have played in King Crimson as well. John Wetton, there's a guy that I didn't put him in my top 10 because he's not particularly one of my favorites, but you can't deny the ability of the guy. The guy is a fantastic vocalist and an absolute killer bass player on everything he touches. But I didn't include him here because I don't really feel like he's one of my favorites, but a guy that you have to bring up when you're talking about legendary bass players for progressive rock. The other thing is I already have enough dead people in the list. I didn't want to keep adding to it. Right? So yeah, so those are some honorable mentions. I'm sure there's lots of people I'm not thinking of, but you can only pick the ones that you listen to the most and you know the most about. So a lot of these guys are still fairly new to me. John Jowett, of course, and Derek Moore. Ray Shulman, although I've been listening to him for like 40 years, it's only been in the last 2 or 3 years that I've really appreciated the band Gentle Giant. So, but enough that he, to me, is one of the greats of all time. And if you really want to listen to some fantastic instrumentation by a band, this album I would highly recommend. There's some absolute killer instrumentation on this album, and the bass playing is one of the dominant. I think the bass playing may be the best bass, the best instrument on this album. He's just absolutely killer on this album. Anyways, anybody else that you want to bring up? Yeah, there's a couple of bands that I didn't talk much about here, only because they're still fairly new to me. I do have a couple of albums from. One of them is a Jade Warrior. See if I can find the Jade Warrior album. I've got a couple of them. See if I can find one of them. It should be waiting its turn here, but I'm not seeing it. That's not them. This could be it here. Nope, not it. Anyways, they're a band that, oh, this might be it. No, that's another. This is another Warbler album. This one's waiting its turn for my playlist, and I'm sure it's going to be a killer. It was their, I think this is their second studio album. I like these guys a lot. They're one of the bands that I discovered on the channel, and I've really liked a lot. The other one that I really like a lot is this one by Eloy. This is another band that, if you like that Pink Floyd sound or the heavy kind of progressive rock, space rock sound, you're going to like this stuff. If you haven't listened to these guys, give them a try as well. What else? Yeah, I can't see the Jade Warrior one. Oh, here it is. I get it now. So this is the most recent Jade Warrior. I have a couple other albums. This one is the most recent. Artwork is fantastic. Really like it a lot. highly recommend. These guys are a little bit different than a lot of other bands. They've got a lot of different sounds to their music. To me, they're still very progressive, but they have, some almost kind of really folky stuff and some very poppy stuff at the same time. It's a very weird mix of music, but I highly recommend giving this a try anyways. So they've got like 3 or 4 albums. I've got 2 of them. This one was the most recent one. Another really good band. What was the other one that I wanted to bring up? Can't think of what it is now. Oh, another band I like quite a bit, although that I don't really think of them as progressive rock, is a band called Osric Tentacles. Some really good bass stuff on that too. It's more of a psychedelic album than I wouldn't call it a prog album. I would think of it as a psychedelic album. Maybe, you could listen to Atomic Rooster, but I think of them as more of a bluesy hard rock band with some progressive overtones. Now, some people do like this particular band. I'm going to pull them out here if I can find it. I did see it. Now I've lost it. No, I can't find it. I thought maybe they were right here, but they're not. So another band like that, Vandergraaf Generator. I like their music. Don't get me wrong, I like their music. But sometimes you get one element on an album or with a band that you just can't tolerate, and I can't tolerate Peter Hamill's voice, at least not on that particular stuff. Now, bringing that up, having said that, there is a band who Peter Hamill sings with that I really like the album a lot, and fantastic cover as well, and that's this band here, Androgynous. Amorphous Androgynous. The stuff on here is really solid. Give this a try as well if you want. Fantastic stuff on here. It's a little pricey, this album, because it's an import. The album cover is fantastic, and Peter Hamill does the vocals, as you can see. His name's there at the bottom. I highly recommend this album. Fantastic. And of course, Hawkwind is a band that I like a lot, especially the earlier Hawkwind. The first 4 or 5 albums, really solid, really good stuff. So that should be just about it. Not sure that I want to do a Christmas thing for prog bands. Sorry, it's not really my thing. I did do some stuff for Halloween. I'm not sure I want to do that for prog. Maybe I will do it next week. Maybe we'll see what happens. So, anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I'm going to continue to do this same thing every Friday night. Next week, we're going to do, I think we're going to be doing drummers. We're going to progressive rock drummers. Going to talk a little, pick a top 10 again and do what we did now, which we're talking about these wonderful bass players. There's some guys that you just, you when the episode ends, you always say to yourself, oh, I forgot about that guy. He's so good. I forgot about him. Another band I really like, who just has their first album in my playlist, and I don't know why I forgot to say this, is Greenslade. Some really good, solid stuff here. I don't know that the bass player is all that dominant. This is a band with 2 keyboardists, so they're a keyboard-dominated band. They don't have a guitarist, or at least I don't think so. But the bass player is pretty solid in here as well. Greenslade. I have all 4 of their original studio albums, and I'm looking to get the David Greenslade solo album as well, because I think that's almost as good. Yep. Thanks, Grandizer. You have yourself a great Christmas too. We'll be back next week, so hopefully we'll see you then. And I'm glad everybody has come out. People have come out tonight and had to talk about this. I'm going to try to do, once I get through the instrumentation videos on this particular subject, we'll do drummers and keyboardists and vocalists, and then I think we're going to try maybe some very different topics to get into, maybe specialize in a particular album. That seems to be, people like to go really into depth in an album and what makes that album so special. I think I want to do some stuff like that. in the new year for this particular show that we do every Friday night. So I hope you can join me for that, and take care. Have a good evening, and we will see you again next Friday for another episode of Into the Progverse. Take care and have yourself a good one. Goodbye.